Well, welcome to this thought for the day for the 25th of April, and we continue our Franciscan journey. Today, I'm going to talk about the Third Order, which is the part of the Franciscan family for which I personally belong at this time. And the Third Order is, I think, one of the greatest gifts to the church. Western church that has come about, and I think has huge opportunities and relevance for today. The Third Order was established by St. Francis himself in 1221, when as a way of helping many of the people who wanted to follow his way, but obviously weren't able to up sticks and leave. The trouble with Francis was that he was such a compelling person, and his message resonated so deeply with so many people of his day. This simple yet difficult path of living the gospel, literally living the way of Christ, giving up all one's possessions and following Christ into the Gospels, of this good news of that the kingdom of God is near. And through the gifts that God placed upon Francis, his preaching and his life, which supported his preaching, which I mentioned yesterday, just led so many people to abandon families and fortunes and all sorts of things and to follow him. Now, obviously, you can't all do that. And Francis was able to recognize this, that there were many who had obligations, who were married, who had children, who needed to still function, as it were, in regular society, and couldn't just up sticks and join the first order of brothers or the second order of Poor Clares, but so desperately wanted to follow a Franciscan path in society. And Francis gave them that opportunity by developing the Third Order, and it was in 1221 that the Pope of the time, Innocent III, approved the Third Order rule. Now I'm just going to quickly bring my rule up so that I can go through it. And the thing is that as I've mentioned, the threefold vows of the first and second orders, which are poverty, chastity, and obedience, are all is what the first and second orders are called to, but enable to help those who wanted to follow a path of Franciscan spirituality and to live those gospel principles in their own life more effectively and within a community. Because we see in these early decades of the 1200s that the people were crying out for someone like Francis, someone who showed them the genuineness of the Gospels, and people flocked to him. It was a great missionary movement, and therefore we needed some order in how to go about that. So unlike the first and second orders of Franciscans, the Third Orders have their own personal rule, which includes 9 different points instead of 3. It talks about the celebration, being regularly engaged in the celebration and participation in the Eucharist. being that communion with God and with each other. Penitence, yeah, having a clear example of confession and being in right standing again with God and with other people, and where we've erred, put that right. To have a life that is permeated by personal prayer, whatever prayer, whatever style of prayer or whatever approach to prayer one may take, that our lives are filled with and are prayerful lives. To live a life of self-denial and self-discipline, to have restrictions around us which then give us greater freedom in regards to life, and to also reduce our impact on those around us and the whole of creation. To go on retreat, to realize that just as we need physical food to nourish us, we also need periods of time where we can have our spiritual food. So the third order, part of our personal rule is that we go on retreat each year. A commitment to study, that's not just a study of the Gospels and scriptures, but also study of the world and understanding the community around us. Francis himself wasn't one for intellectual study, so therefore, that's not the call necessarily. It's not for you to go off and get masters and doctorates and things like that, although formal study can be part of it. However, it's more a study and an engagement with the things of God, and the study of how the world is working and the reality of the world at the time. And as the first and second order are called to a life of poverty, obviously that's not practical for people who have dependents, whether that's a spouse or whether that's a children or whoever, or even employees. The fact is that we in the third order therefore can't necessarily give up everything we own, but we are called to a life of simplicity, and it is about that understanding that everything that we have and everything that we possess, we are just custodians of. We're holding it whilst we need it, and we need to be prepared and so not attached to those things, so that we can let them go when our time of having them has come to an end. We also look at our place in society, work and family. The Franciscan approach is that we need to work on our relationships. That if we are within married relationships, or we're parents, or we have other friendships and things like that, again, we need to be able to be faithful to those. We ought to be the good employee, or the good boss, or the good husband or the good wife that supports each other in mutual love and respect. And finally, we're called to obedience, and that's obedience to a community. As I've mentioned in the previous episode on the first order and second order call to obedience, it's the same thing for the third order, that we come under a collective body and that we are accountable to each other. And the wonderful thing about the third order is that these things really just, for me personally, it enables me to live out a gospel life. Do you need to be a third order Franciscan to do that? Of course not. That is sheer arrogance, and that's against the humility that we are called to in the Franciscan fold. But it can be a help to people, and it certainly has been a help to me to live a more Christ-like life. So the third order, I think, is a genius thing, and how does it speak to today? Well, we just have to look around us. That I think Francis, like in most things, was well ahead of the curve. We now in the church, the Anglican Church in the UK, as well as the Methodist Church, and that have fresh expressions. I think the Third Order Franciscan movement was one of the original first fresh expressions of church, of living out a kingdom lifestyle and kingdom life, following Christ in a radical way. We've seen in recent years the rise in missional communities, or new monastic communities as they're called. Well, the Third Order effectively is like that type of community, centered around common practices with personal rules that fit within the rule of the Third Order, where people, communities of people get together for prayer, for meeting, for fellowship, for accountability and obedience. And it's the same sorts of principles that many of the new monastic communities, such as the Northumbria community and Iona community, and many others within the Anglican Communion and other churches, have sought to establish. So, I find that the Third Order speaks very much into those days, and we can see even in society in general. You only have to go onto YouTube and type in minimalism, and there's a whole swathe of videos talking to how people are finding a spiritual benefit and material benefit from really stripping back and paring down their lives to just the sheer essentials, and how they find that gives them an added freedom that when they're encumbered with stuff, it doesn't offer them. So I think Francis was well ahead of the curve for the modern zeitgeist. So I can talk for hours on the Third Order, so I won't bore you with that. But if you do wish to speak to me further about it, do let me know. But I hope that gives you a glimpse into the Third Order and the richness that it gives to the Anglican Communion particularly, but also amongst our Catholic and Lutheran brothers and sisters as well.